This is not your first rodeo. You've been around the block was it 7 or 8 times?
This is my seventh journey around the publishing sun.
Yeah, and your book is a week old. Well, what's your favorite part of the publishing process, and what part of it are you most still feeling kind of challenged by
Oh,
7 books?
I think my favorite part is those moments when you're writing and you feel like you're in the pocket
Mhm.
and you feel like you're really connected to yourself at a deeper level. Or those are my favorite moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, it's really fun to be me right now. Like I'm enjoying this process. Um, and actually, looking back, I actually also enjoy the times when I'm struggling with my writing and because that usually means that I'm going to a deeper place in myself and a deeper healing, a deeper understanding of what it is to be a messy, marvelous human. Um, and then I always forget what it's like to actually market the book and the work that it takes after the book comes out in the world. And you're like, whoa, it's like childbirth. I've never had a child, but I can imagine it's like that where nature makes you forget so that
Yeah,
you'll keep procreating.
yeah. That's the most challenging part for me is the whole marketing aspect. I was just looking through your social media and I was like, oh my God, I just went through it a couple months ago, but it's just still, having to do all the posting and it's kind of fun having conversations, but just, having to kind of put yourself out there. I never get used to that, I never get used to it. I think people take it for granted that that's just, we're cool with all of that, but it takes a lot of effort for me
It,
at least.
I'm with you. I think what I'm learning, I have some really wonderful friends in my life who remind me about things like setting boundaries. And
Mhm.
and even though I teach self-care, I have wonderful friends who remind me how to practice self-care. And I think that I don't know if you connect to the term introvert or yeah, me too. And so what I realized through this process is the times when I'm really out, I have to be really mindful about how I'm taking care of myself and giving myself like deep rest
Mhm.
and a time to go inward with absolutely no responsibilities. I mean, the responsibilities of everyday life, but no obligations, free time, unstructured, creative time. Like you can't just keep pouring out, and this is for life too. You can't continue to pour out without giving yourself that opportunity to fill up.
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
that that's probably the thing that these campaigns teach me the most is like finding the moments of filling up throughout the day or over the weekend where you're going to really stand for that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
What does that look like on an average day? Like walk me through like an average, like sort of a morning routine, but how do you fill up? What are your practices like?
yeah. So part of filling up today was, I wake up every day and I say a prayer of thanks, just thanking my body for another opportunity to be
Just
human.
just in your bed while you're lying there,
Yeah,
you have to
I
get up
do.
and
Put my
okay.
hand on my heart and I say, thank you so much for another opportunity to do this thing called life. And I try to set an intention from that place of, what's it going to look like for you to stay connected to your heart today?
Mhm.
Um, and for me, little moments of breaks come from I listened to one of your podcasts. I had a meeting at 10 o'clock and then from 10 to 11, I had this break and I could have done so many emails because there's so many festering in my inbox right now.
Mhm.
But I was just like laid on the sofa with my blanket. I listened to one of your podcasts to like get ready for our energy and our time together. And and it was beautiful. And so heart centered and also an opportunity for me to just take it down a notch. Um,
Mhm.
and so whatever it could look like, I love birds. I'm a big birder. You think this is not what I thought I would be when I was a teenager. I was like, you're gonna be hot and fancy. And I'm like, yeah, I actually like birds and I'm a birder.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I spend a lot of time outside feeding my birds in between podcasts. Yesterday it was pouring rain, and I had so many interviews, and I just put that raincoat on and spent time cleaning my hummingbird feeders. My husband's like, you have 5 minutes before like Good Morning Seattle. I'm like, I'm coming, but this is what I need.
Hmm. That sounds like a beautiful life.
When I listen to it, it is.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So let's do this for my listeners who don't know your backstory. Let's kind of take it back to, is it Pauling, New York? Is that where you were born, or is that where you grew up? Or talk about your earlier years growing up. Your new book is kind of like, to me, a love letter to your dad. So I would love to get familiar with your relationship with him as a young person, but then he was also your adopted dad. So I don't know how that all plays out, but kind of give us some context into your developmental years. What were you thinking you would become as a young person? Um, what were you like as a student? Uh, what ideologies did you grow up believing around success, or what it meant to be a productive citizen of the world?
Mm. Wow, you're taking us way back to the beginning. I love this. Um, well, yes, I grew up in a very small town in upstate New York, and I grew up across the street from a dairy farm,
Mhm.
and there were no kids in my neighborhood. So for me, the kids were, stray cats and all of my friends at the farm and nature. And I was very connected, still am, to nature. It is where I felt most alive and still do. I was a very shy child, but I was also super creative. And all I wanted to do was dance and act and tell stories and write stories for my dolls and all of my cow friends. And so I had a very imaginative childhood because I grew up with my mother and my grandmother, and they really let me be feral in a lot of ways. Um, and so a lot of how I figured out the world was just through my creativity and having a very creative childhood. And so, but I will say that I did not know my father. So, yeah, as you referenced, I didn't know my biological father. And that was a source of great pain and confusion and suffering for me as a kid. And then when I was 9, my mom met my stepdad, who later adopted me, and he became my chosen father. And so a lot of the healing that came from sort of a deep sense of abandonment and the trauma that surrounds that, what I found through that relationship. And when I was 31 years old, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which I've been living with for 20 years now. And I think that that's what, if anybody knows my story or has read any of my books, I initially took that pain and that confusion and that reckoning, or what I call rupture, and started writing about that journey and all that I had been learning as somebody who decided to go on a pilgrimage of what true self-care looks like, at least for me. And so I wrote many books about that topic, about an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. And it wasn't until my dad was diagnosed in 2016, and we were, it was before the pandemic, but there was a lot of big changes that were afoot in my life. But really, it was his diagnosis that became another turning point for me. And that's what I write about in this book, which is, the whole process and the emotions and the experiences that come up around ruptures, or as we would say, what happens when the rug gets pulled out from under us, and the opportunities that arise as a result of that.
I want to, before we get into that, which I definitely want to get into it, but I want to fill in just a couple of more gaps from earlier life. Um, when you reflect back now, or in these last 20 years from thriving with cancer, as you call it, and you're connecting some of those dots, right? Like you've had a couple of different career paths. You were a teacher for a long time, you were a photographer for a long time, and then you became an advocate, a wellness advocate as a result of your cancer experiences. And to me, what that means from reading your work is that you're still teaching, right? And you're still sort of presenting a perspective, which is what I feel like photography is you're
Mm.
capturing a perspective for people. So I'm curious. I want to hear. I would love to hear more about what those experiences taught you in terms of developing frameworks for understanding things that you're now applying to your work today. Did you,
Mm.
when you look back and reflect on that, can you see connections between, oh, wow, this thing I was experiencing while teaching or while working with actors and models and capturing their images, that I'm still kind of doing that, but in a different way today? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because I think a lot of times people um, can discount whatever they're experiencing now, not realizing, hey, this is going to come into play at some point in the future
Oh
when you sort of
yeah.
drop into your calling. It may not seem like it's related, but just keep paying attention, stay present to it because something good is going to come from this. So what have you discovered?
I love that question. I, the biggest thing I can say is to continue to give ourselves permission to evolve
Mhm.
because I've had many careers, as you said. I started as an actor and a dancer myself, and I got my first agent when I was 19 years old. And I moved to New York and I started working. Um, but I had been a very dedicated student of the arts from the time I was a teenager because I think for me, it gave me a sense of security, discipline. It was a structure, it was a container. And growing up in a household at times that was not stable, I craved it. And so if my dance teacher said do 100 tendus, I did 1,000 tendus. It was like I was just so determined. Um, and I fell in love with performing. So here I am many years later. And to your point, I've had a photography business. I've taught acting at NYU. I've been an actor and a performer and a director and a choreographer. Um, but when I was diagnosed, I realized that I did not want to pursue the arts the way I had been pursuing it. And it had kind of been coming for a while. I was sort of sick of auditioning and having somebody give me permission to do what I wanted to do. Um, and as somebody who is also very much an introvert, I'd say that every single one of those tendus and every single class and every time that I had to get up and put myself out there to share my creativity or to potentially help somebody laugh or to touch somebody's heart, every time that I did that, I was preparing for this chapter in my life. And I didn't think about that back then. If I could talk to myself back then and all of the times that I was rejected and all of the jobs that I wish I got but somebody else got, and then all of the self-doubt, I'm not good enough, I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough. And then to look at some of the opportunities that I've had now and say, if you didn't have that training, you'd fall flat on your face on that stage. You didn't know what kind of stage life was preparing you for.
Yeah, what's interesting is I lived in New York during those years that you were there. And I was there from 96 to 2003, 2002, sorry. And I was in the modeling industry. I was modeling. So I was just wondering, I was reflecting. I was like, I wonder if she and I were in the same space at some point.
We might have
Were
been.
you testing models in addition to doing portraits for actors or mostly
I,
acting?
I wasn't, but occasionally my agents would send me on casting calls that were really for models. And I would remember calling and being like, are you nuts? Do you know who's here? So you were probably in those. And I was
The
probably
commercial
going,
auditions.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
talk about all the different casting places that we went to and changing in cabs and all
Yeah.
the things.
And then February 14th, 2003, I had just moved to Los Angeles a few months before, and it was actually I think it was that day that I met the guy who became my meditation teacher, who inspired me to want to get
Mm.
all of that. And you were having a very different kind of experience in over in New York. Were you in a relationship at the time? Like, what was your plan for Valentine's Day? Valentine's
Oh,
Day is
actually,
a great
no,
way.
no. I had just gone through a terrible, terrible breakup. Like I had gone through a
Okay.
terrible breakup a few years before, and my heart was still ripped open.
Hmm.
And so
So
still,
Valentine's Day was a reminder of
yeah,
what was happening in your
exactly
life.
what wasn't happening in my life. Yeah, so I was diagnosed on Valentine's Day with this very rare, incurable stage 4 cancer. I was given 10 years to live. And, the first doctor that I spoke to suggested a triple organ transplant. And I'm coming from this very different world. I did not know anything about, first and foremost, about the body, or
What was the
how
symptom? What made you go to get checked out in the first place?
I was having a lot of pain in my side. And to be honest with you, I just thought it was constipation. I was like, I think it's constipation, but maybe I should go check it out. But I put it off.
How long had that pain been last? Was
I
it
put
like
it off
months?
for a while. Yeah, I had put it off for probably about a month.
Okay.
And it kept getting worse. And then I decided to go to my GP and they did ultrasound and they said that I had lesions all over my liver and I didn't
Mhm.
know what lesions were. So I was like, what's a lesion? And you're just like, are my liver's cut up? Like too many martinis? Like, what are you saying? And they were like, no, lesions are tumors. And you need to go get a full body scan to see if there's someplace else, and then a biopsy to see what the heck they are.
And you went right to Whole Foods. Which Whole Foods did you go to?
Well, I went to Whole Foods after all that rigmarole when, then I got the scans and then I had the first doctor appointment, the second one, the third opinion. And then finally, around that time, I was like, this is a thing. Like, I got to figure out who to hire, who to fire, who to be on my team. This is a
Uh-huh.
business and I'm going to have to be in charge of it. And I don't know how to be a patient navigator and I don't know how to take care of myself. We have to figure out all those things because this is an incurable shit pickle. And now I am the captain of it. Um, and around that time, I had met my doctor, who is still my doctor 20 years later. And he said, look, sometimes this can be slow growing, sometimes it can be aggressive, sometimes it can change out of nowhere. So we're going to watch and wait and create a baseline and figure out how it's going to behave in you. And while we're watching and waiting and tracking and creating that baseline, you need to live, you need to watch and live.
Mhm.
And that moment was very profound for me because, as I said, I didn't know how to do that. So I thought that people who live go to Whole Foods. They eat healthy things. They seem to radiate in ways that I don't understand. So I'm going to start at that grocery store and see where it takes me.
Mhm. I have a personal question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but I'll ask it anyway. Um, I find that to find those kinds of doctors, a lot of times they don't take insurance, to find the best kind of doctors. And I can imagine that going through all of this and finding the best people would be very expensive. What were some of the challenges with finances at that time? Because now you're probably just focused all in on that, but no one really saves up for the time they get diagnosed with cancer. So how
Yeah.
was that experience for you?
Well, I was a member of the Screen Actors Guild at the
Mhm.
time. And so I was a union member, and my health insurance was through the Screen Actors Guild. And I was very blessed that I had it, because to your point, that's an enormous amount of money to have to pay if it's out of pocket. Um, and I had almost let my dues lapse, which thankfully, I don't know. I think it was like some sort of guardian angel who came in and said, "Hey, open that. Be a responsible union member." Um, but a lot of what I had experimented with and tried, and I've been on a very big healing journey, was and continues to be something that is out of pocket. And so it's challenging. There's no way around that. I also have a very supportive family, and there were times where I needed help, especially in the beginning. And I'm first to say I feel very lucky that I was able to.
Okay, so and this is all part of your stories, all been well documented in your other books. Just give us a little montage of how you kind of navigated that, and how did the documentary come about, and how did that lead to your marriage, and all the things, kind of taking us up to now.
Yeah, so I left the hospital. I went to Whole Foods. I put all the vegetables in my cart and didn't know what to do with them, and was terrified of kale and thought that life is truly over because I have to eat this thing. Um, and then I bought some cookbooks, and I started to learn how to cook healthy food. And then I realized this doesn't have to be terrible. And actually, oh, wait, I'm starting to feel a little bit better. It's the classic journey. And what happened that summer was I actually went to New Mexico, and I went to the Upaya Zen Center. And so I've gone to Whole Foods now because I'm thinking, okay, I'm addressing what I'm eating, but my mind is a mess, and I've got to address what's eating me. And
Mhm.
I was there, and I just so happened to see that Sharon Salzberg was teaching that night, and I had heard of her, but I didn't know much about her. And she gave a Dharma talk, and I was hooked. I was like, I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know how long I'm going to live, but however long it is, I want to feel as good as I'm feeling in this moment. And so I'm going to see if they'll let me stay here for a little bit. And so I stayed at Upaya for a time. And that was kind of the beginning of this healing exploration that I decided I wanted to document. And first and foremost, I was documenting it for myself, but also because, as coming from the arts, coming from a place of being a creator, that's how I get to know myself. That's how I make sense of what's happening in my world. It gave me a creative focus. It gave me something to take my mind off of cancer. And I started filming my experience. And then
Was that just you with the camera, or did you have people?
now it was just me. I borrowed a friend's camera, and he literally, I mean, I had done a lot of still photography in my business, but I didn't know how to make a film. And he would teach me, little things here and there. And then I decided I wanted to make a little trailer because I had been filming for probably about 6 to 8 months. And a friend of mine reminded me that I knew this guy named Brian, who I thought was a drummer. And turns out he was a film editor. I'm like, "You mean the drummer guy?" She's like, "Yeah, no, he's an editor." I was like, "Oh, I need an editor. I want to cut a little trailer," because I had heard about this industry night, and all I needed was a trailer
Mhm.
for the film that I was working on. And he cut the trailer, and we submitted it to the industry night, and we actually got picked to be represented. And then I sold the film to the Discovery Channel. And I mean, this is a 4-year process, and all of it was on my credit cards. So it's not totally oh wow, that's so easy.
Did Brian agree to work for pay, or was he a part of the, like, if you join me, then we'll sell it together type of a deal?
I think he agreed to do it because he wanted to date me, quite
Yeah.
honestly.
Of course.
So, no, yeah, that was part of it. But yes, I had no money. So it was just, will you work on this on the side? Um, and then of course, then he did get paid and he was a big part of the process. He was co-producer of the process and we got married. So the end of the film ends with us getting married, which was not how I thought the film was going to end. It's like, I think there was a part of me that wanted the film to end with this happy story of remission, and to be honest with you, the reason why it took almost 5 years to make was because I was still trying to cure myself, because I thought it had to be like a classic hero's journey of the moment the rupture happens and then the hero goes out and learns a whole bunch of stuff and it brings all this information back to the village and there's some sort of great happy ending, and it's a very distorted version of the hero's journey. But I kept pushing it off because I hadn't self-cured with all of the radical integrative functional, back then they called it alternative treatments, that I was doing. I thought none of this will be valuable unless it all goes away. And so the tagline for the film ended up being looking for a cure and finding a life.
Was it was it an easy sell when you were pitching it, or did you
No,
have to go through like a lot of just rejection?
endless
Because
rejection and all of it of just, you can't make
you think
film.
your story is really interesting, but you put it
I
in the
thought it
market.
was interesting.
The market is
Um,
like, well, nope, 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 nope.
yeah, nobody wants to hear a story about cancer, and nobody wants a story about cancer called that. Like, it was all this no. And I just said to myself, and back to your original question, if I hadn't learned how to take rejection and
Mhm.
keep going, I I wouldn't have kept pursuing it.
Mhm.
But I had taken so much rejection in my previous career that I was like, all I need is one person to believe in me. You just don't see it, but I see it. And I'm going to keep this faith and I'm going to keep moving ahead because I will find one person who believes in this.
Yeah,
Because
I had the
so
same
that
thing.
was it.
Like the most valuable experience from modeling was all the rejection because literally, well, I didn't realize that to be a model, you had to be discovered. Like that's how it's traditionally done. I discovered myself. I just woke up and decided I'm going to be a model today. And I went to all the agencies, got rejected by everyone, and then got some more pictures, went back, got rejected by everyone again, except for the last one. And that happened to me in several different markets. So I just figured, okay, well, this is what it is. You just get rejected until someone believes in you. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out because I feel like again, a lot of people listening to this are probably going through some aspect of rejection, and so easy to personalize it and think, oh, well, maybe my project is not that great. But the real reality is you just need to find someone who aligns with your mission and don't water down the mission. Just keep exploring tactics. What were some of the tactics that you had to explore that you didn't anticipate exploring when you first set off on this project to get your film and your book and all that stuff out into the world?
Well, first I had to learn how to be a filmmaker. And thankfully, Brian, was a filmmaker, is a filmmaker. And he was like, how about B-roll? How about I teach you a couple of other things? And I
Oh,
was
you
like,
didn't have any B-roll?
oh, no, I was like, it just nothing.
Just
It,
you on camera all the
uh-huh, it
time?
was terrible. It was terrible. Meanwhile, I'd been in the industry for how long? You know, um, so I think part of it was I was so hungry to learn and I was so excited. And it was that hunger and that excitement and that connection to curiosity and joy, even though what I was talking about was really tough stuff. It was very fueling for me. And so just staying in that place was how I just kept moving forward. And also, I think when you come from a background of being an actor or a model or a performer, you're used to playing somebody else. You're used to projecting a certain image that it's not necessarily you. And the shift for me was, this is your opportunity to be fully yourself. And the more fully yourself you are, the better chance it has.
Was that intuitive, or did someone kind of guide you in that direction?
Um, I think it was partly intuitive, but it was also the clips that I would show that were more raw or more vulnerable or had my real humor were the things that the network was responding to.
Mhm.
And anything that was too polished or performative was like, we would get an enormous amount of notes and deflated and whatnot. It was like, oh, so the goal is just to be yourself. I got it. Oh, well, who is that? Well, guess we'll find out.
Gosh, I think we're all struggling with that. I know I struggle with that all the time. Just putting stuff out on social media. You do see that the things that are most authentic are the things that just organically get that traction. And then the polished stuff that you think is going to go viral because you spent so much time planning to be authentic, it doesn't happen.
It's
It
true.
doesn't happen.
It's true.
So, all right. So then you become like Kris Carr, like people know your name in the wellness industry. Um, and a lot of times if people are going through that, you try to do everything yourself, right? You're like a one person show, but then eventually you kind of have to let go of that control. So talk about that process for you. Again, someone's listening to this, they're going through their own thing and maybe it's starting to get a little traction, but they're feeling overwhelmed because they're on top of the healing they're doing. They're also trying to manage all the vendors and trying to get on Oprah and talk a little bit about how you developed your team or whatever way it happened.
I mean, it was hair on fire. That's how I developed my
Mhm.
team, and then having to learn how to actually lead a team. And so
Mhm.
everything I've learned in the trench of doing and just going for it. I think that what I did right was to stay connected to what I was good at, which was speaking and writing, and not trying to do too many of all of the things because when you're building your business, you're building your brand, or you're building whatever it is that you want to build, it's easy to see that people are doing all of these different things and you think you have to do it all. Otherwise, you won't get any traction. And doing it all is one of the ways you won't get that traction. Doing like one or two things well and just sticking with it for me was the lesson. Now, maybe somebody else can handle a lot more, but I couldn't. And every time it's still happening, 20 years later, I've been doing this now. Every time I start to stretch myself too thin, I don't get the results that I want. And when I go back to the things that I am good at, but I also enjoy, um, I think that that's when the business flourishes. And so do I.
Especially if your peers are also doing a lot of things. I know you and Marie Forleo are good friends, and she's had a thriving platform for a while. So you may be thinking, wow, I need to be doing more of what she's doing and this other person's doing, um, and that it puts an added pressure on everything, and you want to reinvest in the business and all the things. So you ended up getting featured on Oprah. What's the backstory on that? Because none of these things happen like people think they happen. So I'm just
It's
curious.
true. Well, I'm going to tell you that when I had that one person at the Discovery Channel, TLC, who believed in me, this one
Uh-huh.
woman, and everybody wanted the show to get canceled because for a very short period of time, they had a imprint, let's call. I don't even remember what it would be called technically, but HBO had just come out with HBO films, HBO docs, and so TLC did TLC Life Lens, and they were documentaries about real people, real stories, and it did not last for more than I think a year, maybe 2 years at the most. And at the time, there was one network exec who was like the head of Lifelines who saw the trailer and believed in us. But I could feel the pressure around it. I could feel that, like, at any moment, the film could get pulled and that it wouldn't air. And so I started to think about how can I leverage opportunities. And I knew that this was like a very small window. And I knew that there were a lot of things in the film, or there were a lot of things that I had learned that weren't in the film. And so I decided I was going to write my first book. And I had no publishers interested in me. But I went back to my old acting agency and they had just acquired a literary division. And so I talked about the book. I had just gotten the deal. So that was in progress and process. And so I went out to all the different, publishing houses. Nobody wanted me. Everybody rejected me. And there was this one last publisher. It was a small publisher in Connecticut. And I lied my ass off. I was like, I'm getting deals left and right. They're all coming in. Oh, there's Penguin. Oh, look at Random House. I'm totally hustling these people. Meanwhile, I'm sure they knew like nobody wanted this book. But they took a chance. And then I went back to the network and I was like, got the publishing deal. And literally we started the publicity. And I got booked on a bunch of different shows. So now I'm saying on shows like, this is when the film is airing. This is when the film is airing. Now, it doesn't mean that TLC was like over a barrel for Kris Carr. They weren't. But it was, I think it was just like that culmination of the energy that was going into both of these projects and saying, this is a special moment and I'm going to take this opportunity. And so that is how I got on Oprah, because both of those things were happening at the same time. And then a lot of people started talking about it. So a lot of press started to happen as a result of both of those things happening at the same time. And at first she booked me on a different show and it got canceled. That was called Women Who Move Mountains. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm over at a woman who moves mountains. And then it got canceled. I'm like, nope, not moving mountains. Definitely back on the ground. And then it ended up being a different show. And it was all about, death and dying and living. And it was me and Randy Pausch, who was a beautiful author who wrote the book, The Last Lecture. And so he got half the segment and I got half the segment. It was just the two of us.
Wow. That's
And
exciting.
it was
That must
very
have been a
exciting.
really big highlight in your life.
It was very exciting. It was special.
What happens after you're on Oprah? Like what's the inbound requests like?
Well, back then, and I do feel like a elder stateswoman right now because it was so long ago and it was the actual Oprah Winfrey show. Um, Back then I had a little blog. I think it was called Crazy Sexy Cancer at
Yeah.
blogspot dot something.
Mhm.
And I didn't even really think that blogging was a thing or was going to be a thing. And it wasn't, it was just like in 2007. It was the beginning of all of that. And my site crashed. So my husband and I were watching the show and we were living in Brooklyn. We had our little sofa that we had found on the street and we were watching the show on our, television. And the little blogspot site crashed. And I didn't know anything about like, you should build an email list, And I remember when my trailer for the film was on YouTube and we had like millions and millions of views and I deleted it by accident. Like because I didn't, so there was a big learning curve, I'll just say. So what happens? You go on the ride. And I think that was the moment that we realized that a lot of people are looking for a better way. And it wasn't just patients who were inspired by what I was sharing. It was people who didn't have illnesses who were like, I would like to feel better. And I resonate with how you're talking about this. And so we decided, okay, we have no idea how to make this into a sustainable business where we could pay ourselves and other people, but you want to try? So that's how it started.
And in the background, you're still trying to heal yourself. You're still like trying to get to a certain finish line, right? And then you kind of had to come to terms with the fact that it was going to be different from what you thought it was going to be, just like the film.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was at my 10-year mark where I left the hospital, and everybody was really, my family was very happy. I was doing so well. My doctor said, "You're doing great. You look great. Everything's stable. Just keep doing what you're doing." And I was devastated
Mm.
because it was still there. And it was one of the big turning points in my life, to tell you the honest truth, because I said to myself, you may never be cured. You may live well into your 90s and beyond, but the entire time you will be putting your life off because it's not good enough, because it doesn't look a certain way, because the medical report doesn't say what you think it should say or what you want it to say. And you will have wasted your entire life. Is that what you want? And I was like, hell no. And so that was the moment where I said, there's a difference between healing and curing. And curing may happen and it takes place in the body, but healing will happen, is happening, is available to each and every one of us until the moment we leave our bodies and beyond. Right. And so I put down the goal of curing myself and dedicated my life to being in the spirit of healing.
Yeah, your book, I'm Not a Morning Person, you talk about how when you first started on that journey and you were embracing the plant-based diet, your parents would try to like manage your enthusiasm around it because you would come home for Thanksgiving and try to convert everybody or give people lectures on why they shouldn't be eating turkey and things like that. So talk a little bit about those earlier experiences of your journey and what you sort of how you when you reached altitude with all of that, where you kind of ended up versus where you started off.
Well, yes, I was a real jerk. Sometimes I came home and I write about that, and I realized I think the part of the book talks about how people aren't projects,
Hmm.
and I was so inspired by what I was learning. I was a newbie, right? And so I'm filled with all of that newbie, great energy. I found the secret, I have the way. And my parents were so gracious and generous to cook a macrobiotic Thanksgiving, which is not easy and not delicious, right? Let's just be, it just wasn't at the time. And I was very happy and excited until the turkey came out. And then I decided to give a lecture about that. And my dad pulled me aside and he said, I know that you're so committed and we believe in what you're talking about, but you have to meet people where they are. And if you want your message to go farther, you can't bonk people over the head with this stuff. And I really heard him. And it was, through his diagnosis when I went with him to one of his doctor's appointments, and the nutritionist walked in the room and said, "Oh, you're Kris Carr. Oh, you're fine. Just do it. She
Do what
tells
she
you to,"
says. Yeah.
which was the last thing they wanted to hear,
Right.
and not and what he wasn't up for.
Mhm.
And I was so terrified of losing him that, of course, I did what I did for myself. I flew into action, making the game plan, calling, networking, calling all of my colleagues that were doctors and like putting together a healing protocol. And he wasn't up for any of it because he couldn't tolerate it.
Mhm.
And so I realized that people aren't projects. And this is not the kind of energy that I need to be showing up with. This is not healing.
Mhm.
We're going to go on a much deeper journey together.
You described him in the book as being a pretty healthy guy, right? And so it was kind of surprising. And this is going to sound like a very obvious question, but can you just talk about what is cancer? Like when people hear that term, what does that actually mean on a biological level? Because I've heard we all have cancer cells inside of our body all the time, but then there are other cells that keep them in check. And so how does the whole thing work?
Yeah. I mean, it's basically it's when a cell goes rogue, right?
Mhm.
And that happens all the time. But to your point, your immune system keeps it in check. But sometimes your immune system can't tell the difference. Sometimes it can't keep it in check. Sometimes that cell, it's like a copy of a copy of, it's like a busted copy, you know?
Mhm.
And it's going to continue to proliferate, and it basically overrides the system, in the most simplest terms. But you have cancer cells in your body right now. Your immune system is just handling them. My immune system didn't, but maybe in some ways my immune system is right now because everything is in check, even though I live with stage 4 cancer and I have dozens of tumors in both of my lungs and my liver.
What does stage 4 mean? If your body's able to manage it, what isn't stage 4 like the end stage, or how does
It
that
is
work?
an advanced stage. So usually the staging is about the location. So if it leaves the primary organ, so the primary area, so because I have it in multiple organs, that becomes a more advanced stage.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, but it's I think it's a little different for different types of cancer, like a blood cancer, for example. But for me, I have a sarcoma. It's a soft tissue cancer. My primary was my liver, and then it spread to both my lungs, which changes the staging.
And your dad was diagnosed with, was it pancreatic cancer?
Yes.
Which
Yes.
means what?
Well, pancreatic cancer is basically cancer of your pancreas.
And how does
And
that, what are the symptoms of that?
for him, it was pain as well. It was like he used to call it an angry stomach. It was lower back pain. He felt as though he had a hernia. He felt as though he had an ulcer. And he had a really wonderful GP, thankfully, who said, everything that you're talking about means you need a CAT scan. Because he was at a business conference when he was feeling this pain, and when he had gone in to get just a regular checkup, thinking again like it was an ulcer or some other weird thing, and she sent him to get a CAT scan, thankfully. And so he caught it relatively early, but pancreatic cancer is a very aggressive cancer. So it did end up spreading.
Okay. So you described that as the time your world sort of fell apart. You said your business was faltering. What does that look like for your business, for your wellness advocates business to be faltering? Because
Well,
I've been there too, like with my meditation team, like there's some slow years, there's some, very abundant years. And
yeah,
when it's slow, you're like, oh my God, is this it? Is this over? Am I done?
I hear you. Um, yeah, so I was approaching my 20-year anniversary of living with stage 4 cancer.
Hmm.
We were in the middle of a global pandemic. My dad's disease became terminal. I had made a lot of very conscious choices to slow down, and to not launch as much, travel as much when we were in the pandemic. But like before then, I got off the road. I was not writing another book. And so I was a little bit more on the hamster wheel of, if I'm not doing, we're not earning.
Hmm.
But so there was a choice. You can keep doing, doing, doing and miss this time, or, you know, take a big hit and be here. And so I chose the latter. We moved closer to my parents, and I was very determined to be as big a part of their life as I could at the time.
What is someone, in your estimation, like if you have a parent who's been diagnosed with something, what do they need?
Mm. Oh gosh, that's a great question. Would you want the practical?
I mean,
What?
obviously it's
Yeah.
the case to case, but just in general, like like do you think being there, like being in person, because people, parents will say, no, no, don't put yourself out, don't do this, don't do that, but obviously we all want to feel connection, we all want to feel like someone's there for us. So yeah, however you want to answer the question.
I think you said it. It's connection. For me, it was about proximity and being close and being a part of the healing protocol and spending quality time. That's what my choice was. But not everybody can do that. And I love the word that you used. I think, yes, there's a lot that happens and there's a lot that's needed when somebody you love is sick, and there's caregiving tasks, and we can't do all that by ourselves. We do need support, especially if it's a devastating illness, but nothing trumps connection. And so it could be that text that you're sending. It could be the regular FaceTimes. It could be the phone calls. It can be the prayers. It can be, there's so many ways that we can connect. But I think when people are going through difficult times, sometimes we don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. We don't want to get it wrong. We don't want to make things worse. So maybe we vanish or behave in other ways that are the opposite of connection. It's good intentions, but I think it comes from that place of awkwardness and from being afraid to do it wrong, as opposed to being willing to show up even if you get it wrong.
And that's what's beautiful about your situation is that you were uniquely qualified to care give in a way that I feel like would be more compassionate than what most people who've never gone through that would probably end up doing, and making those mistakes and trying to force things onto people that, they weren't really ready for and things like that. Plus, he represents the father you never really had as a younger, when you were in your earliest years. And so, I've read a lot about like soulmate connections, and that kind of has all of the signs of like someone who came into someone's life to help guide them through this experience. And and again, I'm taking a leap of assumption here, but you may even have said in your spirit body, oh, I'll get it first, and but it won't kill me. It'll help me be there for you in a more compassionate way, or something like that. I don't know, but I don't know if any of that resonates with you. But talk a little bit about what you learned during that process of caregiving for your father.
Well, I did think that. I thought my disease was a dress rehearsal for our family.
Hmm.
And his was so much more complicated and so much bigger and so much more aggressive. And at a certain point, it was like way out of my depth, and meaning my knowledge. And I think that that's when the head space fails you, the heart space calls you. And that's what I learned. I'd say, I mean, it's the last 5 years have been my most profound spiritual time. Um, and I write a lot about that because I call the book I'm Not a Mourning Person, because I didn't want to touch that emotion. So even though I'm a wellness teacher and I've been doing all the things that we talked about for the last 20 years, there was a couple of places that it was like holes in my education. And I think it's because I was very resistant to grief specifically, even going into the place of like touching into the trauma of my own diagnosis. And even though I've built a very beautiful life, it's very different from the life that I thought I was going to live. And so there was a mourning of my former sense of self that I never allowed myself. And I called it I'm Not a Mourning Person because I think many of us shy away from the big emotions, especially things like grief, because they're painful. I mean, there's real reasons too. Even from an evolutionary perspective, we want to stay safe. Everything in our body says stay safe, and big emotions don't feel safe. So you want to run away from them. But in the intention to show up fully for somebody I very deeply care about, I had to get comfortable with being very uncomfortable. Not only because it was, my therapist said something really great, which I talk about, which is when the grief train pulls into the station, it brings all the cars. It's fun stuff. You're like, wait a minute. that too. I thought I was over that, 10 years ago, and this is coming up, and that's coming up, and wait, rage is coming up, and guilt is coming up. And I thought, wow, all of this is up for healing, and it's up at this time because of what I'm going through and what I'm experiencing, as I'm preparing myself to lose a love that's so great to me. Um, we had conversations about death and dying, and I didn't know how to do stuff like that. Right. So they were all of these firsts. The first time I allowed myself to truly grieve, the first time I allowed myself to touch trauma, the first time I allowed myself to have a conversation about death and dying with someone who was dying and not shy away from it.
And he had a phrase for it, get on the train or something like that. Or what was his phrase for death?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh God, it's basically get on the bus. Yeah, it's in the introduction. Yes,
Train's
thank you.
coming or something like that. Yeah, I thought that was really
Yes. Yeah, it's
interesting.
getting on the bus.
Yeah.
And yeah, so this whole process, I thought, wow, this is something too that I did not understand and I want to understand more of. And it brought us closer and it allowed me to dive deeper into my own healing and to
Mhm.
hopefully invite other people to touch into some of these places too.
And you've said that, a lot of times in the spiritual community, when things like this happen, oh, it's happening for you. This is a gift. This is, you look at the silver lining, but you have interesting ideas about that. I want to hear more about this whole idea of something being a gift versus something you're just kind of, I don't know, maybe like a college course that you kind of have to navigate, but it's not necessarily enjoyable.
Yeah, I don't think things that happen for you, I don't think things happen for reasons. I think that those can be kind of spiritual platitudes. I kind of rail against that for my own purpose, in my own psychology, and that's no judgment if that's what anybody out there listening to believes in it. It's whatever gets you through, but I think I take it from a position of like being somebody who's lived with stage 4 cancer for 20 years. And I don't think that this happened for a reason. I don't think it happened for me to grow. I don't think that it's God's plan. I wouldn't believe in a greater power that would dole out lessons like that.
Mhm.
Um, I think that all of these are constructs to explain the unexplainable because we humans are very fearful of anything that is uncertain. And I think that allowing and accepting that things are sometimes beyond our understanding and that uncertainty is the human condition, for me, is a healthier place to be. And I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And as I was going through your book, I jotted down some phrases that I would love for you to elaborate on because they're all these sort of surprising truths. Um, Ask what instead of why.
Yes.
What does that mean?
And actually, let me finish my previous thought. It doesn't mean that you can't have riches from your ruptures. It doesn't mean that there aren't blessed things that happen when we open our hearts and we're willing to do the healing work. Um, it doesn't mean any of that. So I don't think that cancer is a gift, but there's been blessings that I have experienced on this journey without question. But it is not something I would ever give you. Do you
Mm,
know? So
mhm.
it's just a shift in how we talk about it. Um,
I think, going back to the college course example, it's like it's something you kind of you're doing and you get out of it what you sort of show up for. So if you're showing up, you're sitting in the front row and you're really paying attention to, what can I learn from this experience? You're going to get more out of it than you're sitting sort of in the back row. And I feel like through every experience in life, we can choose Like we may not be able to control what we experience. We can choose if we sit in the front row versus the back row and how much we pay attention to it. And if we don't pay attention to it, maybe we have to repeat it again and again and again and that kind of thing. So it's like a growth opportunity, but not necessarily a gift.
I love that.
Does
I'm
that resonate?
full alignment, full agreement. Yes, I think that that's beautiful. Yeah, and, there's a saying that Carl Jung talked about, which is basically we circle around the same themes our entire life, and with each orbit, we pass a new layer of meaning, a new layer of understanding, a new layer of growth. And I think that from my perspective, it is that mechanism of orbiting that is our healing.
Mm. Mm. I love that. Yeah, I was just thinking about that the other day in regards to relationships. Like I'm still going through the same shit in relationships that I've been experiencing for the last 25 years. Still feel the same way. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem.
Yeah, you go like, oh, here I am orbiting again. What have I learned this time? Totally. Listen, I'm still orbiting in a lot of areas.
Hmm. Well, that's kind of the what versus why
Yes, thank you.
um, construct, right? Like
Yeah,
more.
so let's talk on that. So I write about this in the chapter about ruptures and this idea that ruptures happen to each and
Which
every
I
one.
call life landmine. I love
I love that. That's what they are. And they happen to us and they come in all shapes and sizes and we can't avoid them. And we did nothing wrong if they happen, right? And sometimes when we're in these places, we get really caught in why me? Why did this happen? Why now? And I think that the question of why can be a very fruitful question to ask because you may find some nugget in there if you're able to answer it. But not all questions are answerable. And it's not about never asking why, it's about not getting stuck in the why. Because when you're stuck in the why, you're stuck in the unchangeable past, as opposed to saying, this is what's happening. What can I do now to support my mental health? What can I do now to support my body? What can I do now to support my spirit?
and oftentimes the best answers are just the small steps, which I just consider to be hops. Like instead of the leap of faith that I think it's romanticized in our society, like what's a hop you can take right now? Just the next step, just the one next step without having to see the whole staircase. Just the next thing that feels aligned, the next thing that resonates. And I think that's where being able to tap back into our own sense of agency is really important, because as you know, when you have these kinds of diagnosis, everybody has an opinion, right? If you have a life landmine or rupture, everyone has an opinion, everyone has a cautionary tale, everyone has advice for you. So for me, recommitting to a practice like a meditation or having spiritual teachers and all of that has been really helpful. What were your sources of inner wisdom that helped you tap into what you were feeling inside to stay the course of whatever you felt was aligned with your heart?
Meditation, without question. And also journaling.
Meta approach, the loving kindness, or that you learned from Sharon, or what were your meditation
I
experience?
mean, I've done a lot of different practices, and for me, it's just sitting in stillness.
Mm.
If I'm really struggling, I'll count my breath just to have an anchor. And then, try to go from 1 to 10 but find myself at 120 and go, oh, that's interesting, and start over. um, but usually I try not to make a thing out of it, just kind of doing my best to sit in silence and sit in stillness and allow thoughts to come and go, but not even get too focused on releasing them or uh, I don't know if any of this makes sense. I think it will to you. It's just, for me, the commitment is just, can I show up and sit?
And if an answer comes through you and or around your practice, how do you vet that answer to know that this is a legitimate next step for me, for Kris?
Well, I try to do the same thing that I do with sending emails. Like if you have to do a difficult email, don't sleep on it. Just kind of drive it around. It's come up for some sort of conversation and awareness for you to chew on. It may not be the right thing, but it's come up.
Mhm.
So drive it around a little bit. Don't act on it just yet. Sleep on it. Maybe journal about it. And then see where that thought takes you.
Mm, I like that. Yeah, I have a policy for myself where I never, if I have to engage in a potentially confrontational exchange via email or text message, never hit send right away. Always stop, meditate, go to sleep, take a nap, go for a walk, do something. And when you come back to it, inevitably you will always change it because you think you're being compassionate or cordial, but you see that, oh, I'm still very triggered and I
Yes,
need
I'm
to
hooked.
hit this. Yeah. Yeah. But you also say to allow yourself to feel your anger. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think especially in our society, when it comes to women, there are certain emotions that are more appropriate than others to share or to even experience. Quote unquote. I did quotes there. I don't know if you saw my air quotes. Um, and I don't think it's just for women, but I think that the point is that especially when you're dealing with the big emotions, the emotions that feel very unsettling, the emotions that feel like if you allow yourself to feel them, you'll be overtaken and you won't be able to function properly. Um, those are the emotions that I think are the ones that are calling out for the deepest kind of attention and healing. We know that our emotions are information, and our curiosity about those emotions can reveal what they're trying to teach us. And
Mhm.
for me, anger was the go to because it felt powerful, where grief felt very powerless. And so when I was sad, I could override that with anger or frustration or some kind of anything but that one emotion
Mhm.
of grief. But if I allowed myself to say, okay, I'm not going to judge this emotion. I'm not going to berate myself because I just got angry because I imploded or exploded. I am going to tend to that emotion. I'm going to get curious about it and see what it's indicating. What is it leading me towards? Something like anger for me is basically your mind and your heart's way of saying, ow, this hurts. This is not okay. There's injustice here. This is not right. It's a way for you to defend yourself, protect somebody else. And so, what's underneath it though? What are we trying to protect? What are we trying to defend? And for me, what was underneath it was where I needed to put a lot of my attention, if that made sense.
Yeah. So it's like a call to action. Um, do you have an example of how you were able to use that anger in a way that helped you to maybe, I don't know, help someone or discover something about yourself or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would get angry if somebody, part of my success came from anger.
Mm,
Because if you say no, then I'm going to get pissed and I'm going to go harder. Right. And so anger actually did a lot of good things for me. When the doctor said, you've got 10 years to live, good luck. I was like, and I was like, you're not my doctor. And I'm pissed. Right. Here I come. I'm going to find somebody else. I'm going to knock down doors until I find somebody who's worthy of being my doctor.
mm,
So anger did a lot of really good things for me.
Hmm.
But when out of balance, you know, it turns inward. And for me, it would turn into depression.
Mm.
And so, um, when my life felt very out of control as my dad was dying, of course, I would have these moments of just extreme rage because I was much more comfortable with it and I understood it more and I was familiar with it. So I wasn't familiar with the softness that was underneath it. Um, and how to really care for it.
Was that depression you described, was it situational or was it there just all the time? Even now, is it still there?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think I've struggled with more than I allowed myself to really realize. But when I'm connected to what what self-care truly needs to look like for me, you know,
Hmm.
giving myself that time, that space, tending to my mental and physical well-being, I do much better, right? But when I'm kind of out of body, like most of us, I think we have moments, and look, as human beings, I think we wake up and we fall back to sleep, right? I had a wake up call. It woke me up. It changed my life. It taught me so many beautiful things, and I have gone back to sleep multiple times. And all
Mm.
of the advice that I have shared, I have not taken myself. Right. So you go back to sleep and then you wake up and then you go, oh, look, instead of beating myself up, I'm going to say, oh, look, I'm noticing I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
I have awareness, which is wonderful. This means I can wake back up again
Mm.
and maybe shorten the time between.
So interesting. I get headaches on occasion, these kind of low level migraine headaches. And when I'm having a headache, I can't do anything. I just lie around and just try to sleep and drink as much water as possible and electrolytes and all the things. And then the other day I found myself walking around and I felt great. And I thought to myself, you know what? I don't have a headache right now. This is a moment of celebration to feel this way. And yeah, so that's what I was reminded of. But you also mentioned the term tending to your garden. Is that what you mean? Like when you fall asleep, you have to come back and tend to your garden in order to kind of wake back up, or how does that play into the framework?
Yeah. So I write about that because what I teach are what I call the 5 pillars of wellness and
Mhm.
are about being mindful about what you're eating, what you're drinking, what you're thinking, and how you're resting and renewing. This is very basic lifestyle medicine. But the key word is mindful, not perfectionistic.
Mm.
And I think we live in a very hack it to pieces, optimize yourself to death society. And for the vast majority of people, it's not attainable or desirable.
Mhm.
And when something is so out of reach, what happens is we don't even lift a finger, right? Because we don't think that we could possibly do it.
Mhm.
And so I try to teach a very simple, sustainable approach to filling your well. Um, and tending your garden is just tending that inner ecosystem, the rivers and the stream and the soil and the beautiful terrain. By is there one thing that you can do each day, or even as beautiful that you said, my dad's oncologist would tell us, don't take it one day at a time, take it one step at a time, because sometimes one day is too much.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people living in the world today, one day is too big. So, one step, especially if you're on a wellness journey, especially if you're living with some sort of illness.
Mhm. This being your seventh book, again, I've written a few books myself, and I've I create a lot of content, and I've got this like person in my mind whenever I'm thinking, oh, this will be a great piece of content to post. This will be really helpful in parentheses for that person. And when I'm writing, I'm writing to this sort of spiritual curiosity seeker, someone who's made, kind of a lone wolf in their own community or household. They're the only ones who really care. Because that's how I was. I have a wonderful family, great people. Everyone's really nice and caring, but I was sort of the only one who was asking these kinds of questions
Mm.
about life and what's the purpose of all of this. And I didn't have anybody to get good answers from down in Alabama when I was growing up. So I find myself now sort of writing to that person.
Mm.
And I'm curious, when you were writing this book, who's that person, who's that avatar that you're writing to?
Well, that's a beautiful question. With my previous books, I would say that I was writing to somebody who had gone through either a big warning sign or a big wake up call, like me. So the warning signs of like, okay, this is all piling up. I might not want to look at this, but it's starting to trouble me. Like, I'm going to have to look at this. It's giving me anxiety, or holy crap, the shizzle just hit the fan. Now what? With this book, I wrote it, honestly, I think I'm the avatar. And I don't think you're supposed to be that, but I am. I wrote it for the person like me who was feeling all the feels,
Mhm,
especially the big feels around grief and loss, and didn't know how to navigate them.
mhm,
Wasn't aware of the emotions and the experiences and the interconnectedness of it that I would go through, and wanted some sort of friend to be able to talk to, or stories that made me feel that I was not crazy, or alone, or, you know, ashamed to be me because I wasn't doing it right. Who knows? We don't know. So few of us know how to do death right. You're like, what? There's no roadmap for this. We spend so much time preparing to bring a child into the world, where there's a lot of parties and showers, and there's a lot of baby clothes and things of the babies need. But when somebody's leaving, we are so clueless as a
mhm.
society. And I was one of those people. And so I wanted to change that for myself first and foremost, and then to just take people on the journey.
It reminds me of something I heard a spiritual teacher once say. He said, if we really knew how life worked, we would mourn when someone is born and we would celebrate when someone passes away.
That's pretty great.
We'd have the funeral at the hospital when they were born.
That's pretty great.
We'd
You
have a
know,
celebration when they
uh,
passed away.
that's amazing. I love that. I had a spiritual teacher actually who, when I was newly diagnosed, I told him and he was like, "Congratulations." I was like, "What?" I was so clueless at the time, but I could see that the why he congratulated me now. But yeah, when I talk about this in the book, there's a chapter and there's a whole section about having the conversation with your loved one if somebody is nearing that stage of life where they're transitioning and they want to talk about it.
Mhm,
And then how to approach that. Because for me, I was afraid to get it wrong. I was afraid I'd create hurt. I was afraid I would create drama. I was afraid that my tears would create more suffering for my dad. And I talked about it with my therapist, and she gave such great wisdom, which she said, why don't you start by talking about it?
mhm,
Like, have a little dress rehearsal. And that's what I did. I said, if you want to have this conversation, I'm open and I'm available. I might not know what to say. I will probably cry, but I'm ready to show up. And he said, I would love to have that conversation. It's so lonely because the world is kind of moving on and people are talking about their futures, and people are talking really quickly, sometimes talking over him because he wasn't keeping up with the pace that all of us travel. and to be able to just slow it down and say, this is the truth of what's happening, and this is what I'm feeling, and these are the things I'm sad about him, was such a gift to be able to have that conversation with him, and then also to be able to show up for him. And so our people tell us what they need, and sometimes we're just afraid, like, oh, let's change the subject, let's talk about something more happy. Oh, you're going to be just fine, buck up, you're going to get through this. But that is doing somebody a disservice, because what they're trying to do in that moment is connect. And what we're doing when we change the subject or say no in whatever way is block the connection.
And it also can put pressure on them to feel better every day, because
Yeah.
this person coming over saying, "Don't you feel better today? I gave you the soup yesterday," and it's not always how it is.
Yeah.
So, okay, a couple of final questions. I want to talk about process, because I'm always thinking about the listener, and someone's listening to this, they're going through their experience, whatever that experience is. And like you, they may want to share it with other people. And when I was reading your book, I'm always amazed when I read memoirs, when people recount things that happened years and years ago. I can't remember what happened last week, right? So if I sat down and try to remember how the conversation went, the details, I can't remember any of it. But I'm always impressed when people are able to get into those details. Was that from a journal? Do you journal about these things? Do you look at photos? Like, how do you remember things that happen in such great detail? And do you recommend for other people who may want to share their experience to help people? Should they start vlogging? Should they start blogging? Should they start journaling? Like, what are your recommendations in that regard?
I love this question. This is so fun. Okay, I'm going to tell you how I do it. Ready? I don't remember anything either.
I'm
So,
like, am I the only writer who can't remember anything? Everyone else
no,
seems
no,
to have
no,
this great memory.
no, I don't have a good memory at all. And then trauma comes along and you dissociate, you know what I mean? So you're just like, I don't know, did I have a childhood? Who knows?
Right.
Um, the thing that I do is I have a story bank. And so I recommend everybody, every writer, and anybody who's interested in healing too, because you don't have to be like, for writing is not just, I want to be a published writer. I think that writing is some of the greatest, most available to all of us ways, tools for getting to know yourself more
Mhm.
and for processing, as you know. So when something's going on that's interesting to me, I write the story down, right? So I keep an ongoing story bank, because I know that I'm going to write many books and those moments are going to pass. But what's also going to pass is the visceralness of the moment, what I was feeling, what the air was like, what it felt like to be in that moment, what I was hearing around me, what it tasted like, right? All of the elements, the senses, I'm not going to remember that. And so I've kept so many journals. I have when I die, all of those are going with me. You know what I mean? Put me on a pile, light the fire, me and the journals, just burn it up, but there's a lot of them. So that's a thing.
Mhm.
Um, it's going to be like Burning Man, right? Um, so keep track of those
You
stories.
journal every day, and when I journaled before, and I don't journal often because I find it very cumbersome, because I can't help but write all the details as if someone from the future is going to be reading this and I need to know all the context. So I was like, this is too much. I can't do this anymore. But what kind of journaling do you do, and how often do you do it?
It used to be every day. Now it's definitely a couple times a week.
Mhm.
Because I just finished the book, so I'm a little bit like, I don't want to write right now. I'm just kind of recovering. Um, but if there's a big moment that happens, I it's probably not more than a page or two, unless if I'm inspired. But I try to get the who, what, when, where,
Yeah.
and some of the emotion and some of the humor, or some of the inner monologue, that what I was thinking. But in my story bank, it's often shorthand too. Like,
Mhm.
if I opened my story bank right now, there's one I know that's Father Francis and the Poodle. Like, I know exactly what that story means. And as I'm starting to outline a new book, what I will do is look at all the stories, kind of see where I am right now. Where are some of the themes? How does the tissue connect? And then I could start to lay out chapters. I like to say I love 10 chapters, 12 chapters. Okay, this is my palette. This is my canvas, and there's going to be X number of chapters. And I start to lay out stories in themes. The book comes to me, right? It's, oh, this is a book about confidence. This is a book about grief. This is a book about whatever it is. And so I'll start to write my stories. Then the teachings will come. Then the research and the support I will kind of build around it. But that's my method. There's a million ways to do this, but I like to start with my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of my books have come to me. You mentioned that the title, I'm Not a Morning Person, which is genius. It came to you in a flash. So did the idea of the book come to you first, or did the title come to you and you thought, oh, I need to do a book about this experience because this is the perfect title? And where were you when that title came to you? Were you like doing dishes? Were you in the bathroom taking a shower? What was going on?
Yeah. So no, I did not actually want to write this book at first. And I'm not saying that for like clever marketing. It has been 7 years. I was on a dry spell. My publishers were like, yo, has been, it's time for you to write another book. And I thought I have to write one of those catchy, yeah, mass marketable, manifesting, or you go girl, like just
Mm-hmm.
empowerment books where you're just like, I can't put it down. Yum, yum, yum. And every part of my body was like, this is exhausting. I just want to sleep. I can't write that book. Here's what I'm dealing with right now. And by the way, we're in a global pandemic. I'm not the only person losing people in, or losing my job or losing my former sense of self or navigating a world that's so different from anything I know. And I'm traumatized by it. And so I was like, all right, well, I guess here we go. We're going to write a book about grief. And they were like, grief, really? Grief does not sell. Like, even when people know they should read a grief book, they're like, hell no, get that book away from me. And I was like, no, 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 this is the book. So God bless. They were like, let's do it. And I did not have a title. So in my contract, it's called the Unicorn Project. And thankfully, they took the chance. I was like, I have no idea what it's going to be called, but we're going to go into these messy places together.
Mm-hmm.
I'll bring the flashlight, you bring the sensible shoes, you know. And then it wasn't until the very end when they're like, look, we need something for the catalog. And I had a Google Doc with over 100 titles, each one more schmaltzy than the last. I mean, they were just terrible. And some of them were just so on the nose. It was just boring. And I just couldn't get it. And then I remember one day I was like feeling really bad about this title. And whenever I feel bad, I watch stand up. I just get in bed and I watch stand up, and my husband will go by and be like, oh, she's not doing well. Ever drawn stand up. And it came. It came from that place of allowing myself to laugh, quite honestly.
Mm. Was it something this comedian said that triggered it, or you just literally out of left field, it just came as you were doing this other thing?
It came as I was doing this other thing. And
Mm.
I think the comedian was talking about either grief or, it was like really heartfelt, but really funny.
Mhm.
And I wish I could tell you who it was. I don't remember who it was, but it was just that moment of levity. And I thought, there's something in this title that has to have that levity, because I do weave in humor throughout the book. And
Mhm.
I wanted somebody to say, oh, if I'm willing to touch a grief book as if you're touching kryptonite, you know what I mean? Like, the cover has to have something in it that makes it maybe a little bit more inviting.
Mhm.
And so that I was like, I'm not a morning person. I mean, at least somebody's going to laugh if they walk by that book. And even if they don't buy it, they had a moment of laughter, which is really healthy. So great.
That's
And
awesome.
I'll tell you, my editor said this is either the this is true. She said, this is either the stupidest title I've ever heard or it's brilliant. I was like, let's go with brilliant. She's like, I don't know how I feel about this. I'm like, the fact that you had either both of those responses, I was like, I think I'm onto something.
Since you brought it up, who are some of your favorite comedians? I'm a big stand-up comedy fan.
Oh, well, all the classics, Chappelle, Carlin, I love Chelsea Handler. There's this woman that I really, really love right now. Her name is Rosebud Baker. Have you ever?
No, but I'm writing it down. I'm going to check it out. Rosebud.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Baker.
Awesome. Well, Kris, that was fun. Thank you so much for for carving out time during this busy. I'm still pretty busy, I'm sure, being a week out from the book launch and coming on to my little podcast and sharing the backstory and answering all my very personal questions about your process.
It's a delight. Thank you so much for having me. No, this is really a
Yeah.
highlight. I was so thrilled when you wanted me to come on your show.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. Click this thumbnail right here, and I'll see you over there.